Good morning, and thank you to Dassault Systèmes for inviting me to address the audience today. As you heard in the introduction, I work for IDC, and I like to tell people that my daughter likes to tease me that in text message abbreviation, IDC means I don't care. But that's not the case. We have about 1,500 analysts located all over the world, and we study the use of technology to help both the technology buyers and suppliers make better decisions. Personally, I've spent my whole career, nearly 40 years now, in the manufacturing industry, following global manufacturing, the last 20 of which have been involved in researching the use of technology in the manufacturing industry. So that's what I would like to draw on. Over that tenure, I've been witness to the tremendous transformation in manufacturing in China, from low-cost producer to product and process innovator. But as you heard in the opening comments, I think the momentum just can't be sustained. It must be accelerated. So what I'd like to talk to you today about is what we see in the research, the information we have of the key elements of accelerating that transformation. I will talk about the future of operations and the future of intelligence, but I'd like to start first with the digital opportunity itself. So when we first started researching digital transformation, it was about 3 years ago, and I was at Mobile World Congress in Europe, and the CEO of a large financial institution stood on stage and he said, "We are no longer a bank. We are a technology company in the financial services industry." And it struck me at that moment that digital transformation isn't a technology initiative, it's a business strategy. And that business strategy is driven off of offering new customer experiences in the market. And you can see a quote here from another CEO, Tim Cook from Apple, where he talks about creating new experiences for customers. And the other important part of this quote, in my opinion, is that he talks about everyone working together. One of the things we've seen in digital transformation is you need a cohesive strategy. It can't be just a set of proof of concept, of conference room pilots. It has to be a cohesive strategy. So the other thing I want to emphasize, beside it being a business strategy, is that we're already into digital transformation. This isn't something out in the future. We're already feeling the effects of digital transformation. And we have a global performance index database. It's about 800 manufacturing companies from around the world. And we recently did an exercise where we looked at public statements from these companies, and we segregated them into 3 categories. Those that we knew were digitally mature, that is, they had reached stage 4 or stage 5 of our maturity model. Those that we referred to as digitally determined, which meant that even though they hadn't reached maturity, they had a long-term strategy and capital plan in place to get there. And then the third category were the laggards, those that were still not even sure what their strategy was. And you can see from these 2 graphs, both the revenue and profit performance since 2013 has been vastly superior for the digitally mature and the digitally determined. So the message here is you can't wait. The competitive environment today across markets dictates that you have to accelerate your digital transformation so that you can keep up with these leading companies. But let's look at the bigger picture for a moment. We also did a study, we call it our digital impact study, and we decided to model the overall impact of digital on the world economy. So you can see what I'm showing here. On the left is an aggressive scenario, and on the right, a conservative scenario. And even in the conservative scenario, by 2022, nearly half the global economy is either digital services or digital products. So this is the market going forward. So not only do you have to catch up, this is the future, because this is where the markets are going. Similarly, when we look at technology investment, so that's GDP, that's the overall economy. When we look at technology investment itself, very consistent with the GDP numbers. You can see by 2022 that 47% of all technology investment is related to digital transformation. And digital transformation is growing at 17.5% per year in terms of investment versus relatively flat for everything else. So the race is on to become digital. So we saw this similar, let's go to manufacturing now. We've sort of covered digital at a high level. Let's talk about manufacturing. And you saw a very similar graph to this yesterday from Accenture, so I won't repeat the history lesson of where we've been in manufacturing. But at the beginning of this decade, we started to see concepts like Industry 4.0 get introduced, Made in China 2025, various names in the United States, smart manufacturing, IIoT, there's a whole set of them. But they all share a common goal, and that is to create cyber-physical systems to innovate in manufacturing. And it's really dependent on a set of new technologies like IoT and artificial intelligence. But I think the getting beyond Industry 4.0 requires the convergence of operational technology and information technology. So if we think about that same history of information technology, we can think about it as going through three platforms. First platform was mainframe, second platform was client-server internet, third platform is digital. So as we bring those together and we incorporate innovation accelerators like IoT and AI, we create a multiplied innovation. It's not just single technologies, it's the multiplied effect of all of them combined. And this moves us towards more autonomy and creates what Dassault would call the industry renaissance amongst the segments. And we certainly agree with that. We think of it in terms of the future enterprise that you need to create to compete in that large digital economy. So the future enterprise is a maturity model. This is the revision of our original digital transformation maturity model. And you can see it includes the future of customers, where we talk about new experiences, very consistent with what Dassault has been talking about for many years now. And also the future of work. How do we think about how work gets done in the future? But for today, I'm going to focus on the middle two. I'm going to focus on the future of intelligence and the future of operations. Before we move on to operations, though, we just received in about a week ago a new survey based Pan-Asia manufacturing survey. So I'd like to share with you the data we received relative to China. And for digital transformation, we asked, what are the priorities in digital transformation and what are the inhibitors? I want to start with the inhibitors because I think they're very interesting. First is in the number one inhibitor, so they had a choice of 10 to 15 things. So I'm showing you the top 3 or 4 on these slides as we go through them. The top inhibitor was a lack of a technology leadership and a roadmap. And that's on this audience. I assume you are the technology leaders at your companies. You need to sit down and think about what that comprehensive roadmap is for digital for your company. The second is a lack of funding, and that's on your senior executives. There has to be a commitment at a board level to digital transformation. And I go back to the example, another very good Dassault customer, Boeing. They've announced a 20-year plan for their digital transformation and committed specific capital investment to that plan. So one of the biggest correlations we see between digital maturity factors in digital maturity is the use of capital to make these investments. So some companies do a project, they create some savings, and then they reinvest it. You move too slow if you try to do it that way. You have to commit a multi-year investment plan to keep pace. And then the third is the lack of skills, and that's on Dassault. because you need to depend on your suppliers to bring data models, to bring advanced pieces of automation for your processes to help you with the skills gap that you might encounter. So let's come back to the priorities. Fortunately, the second and third priority are both related to data, and I'm going to talk about intelligence, so that lines up. And the first one is improve productivity, which relates to operations. Although I would propose to you that perhaps it's not productivity we need to think about. Productivity is an older concept. I think we need to think about how do we deal with complexity. So we're offering all these new digital experiences. Now operations has to deliver on those promises my company is making to customers, and it raises the level of complexity that operation executives have to deal with, which is like why we like to refer to the future of operations as resiliency at scale. Now, yesterday we heard a lot of terms. We heard adaptability, we heard agility, we heard flexibility. We like resilience. So we had a bit of an internal debate about if this was the right word or not, but there's an academic discipline called resilience. There are universities that study resilience in the context of ecological systems and biological systems. And you can see the cover of the book from the leading academic in this area. And I read this book, and as I was reading it, because I'm an old manufacturing and supply chain guy, I was thinking about these same concepts in those terms. And if you think about the definition Mr. Zoli has for resilience, it's the ability to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining your central purpose. So think about that for a moment. Can you adjust your operations? That's the first part. But are you adapting in such a way that you're keeping your purpose in terms of your purpose to your people, to the planet, and to your profit? So that becomes a key element of the future of operations. Some of the characteristics also should be familiar with what we're trying to do beyond Industry 4.0. I need to be simple at the core, diverse at the edge. I need a standardized process across my factories, but I need to be able to push intelligence down to the front lines so that we can allow some empowerment in decision making, some diversity at the edge. We need tight feedback mechanisms. We need to close the loop in the decision making in faster cycles. And we need to be able to move resources to where they're needed if there's a problem. And lastly, in the study of resilience in ecological and biological systems, it's another characteristic is they're natively, inherently sustainable. They naturally eliminate waste. So that's another characteristic. So as you think about the key principles of what you want your operations to be, think about this notion of resilience, this definition, and these characteristics. So how do you implement resilience? So many in the audience come from manufacturing. You're probably familiar with the concept of house of quality, right? This is an exercise I go through on the manufacturing plant where I align my customer requirements to my quality processes. So we sort of borrowed that concept and we created a house of resiliency. And you can see the rows in this house relate to the technology generations. I'm going to focus on the top row, the digital era. And when we think about how do we create an operations strategy, we've always sort of done it at a process level. I've re-engineered the processes. It's a very inside-out approach to operations. What we're saying is you need more design thinking. It has to be outside in. You have to create an operations strategy based on the experience you're trying to deliver. As you calibrate your operations, you know, we've heard a lot of talk the last 2 days about lean. At one point in my career, I was a lean transformation project manager. And I think lean comes along with us on the digital ride. The problem is if you're using Kanban cards and andon lights, it's too manual. The world is moving too fast to do lean in the traditional ways. You need to augment the methodology by using things like machine learning and advanced analytics so you can constantly recalibrate what you're doing for your takt time and your lean processes. Very similarly on control, how do I control my processes, we've always used Six Sigma as the methodology that's the preferred methodology. But now what we're able to do with things like IoT is we can instrument the whole process. We can look for root cause problems without human intervention. That's going to be part of a resilient operations. Obviously, the compute is a digital platform, and the basis of competition is going to be the economy of intelligence, which I will get to in a moment. So if we come back to that survey I talked about earlier, what did China manufacturing companies say about the future of operations? Well, the operation drivers look very traditional to me. I want work in process visibility. I need asset effectiveness. I want to speed my cycle times. I need higher quality levels. These are all kind of traditional process things that drive investment, and they're very important to create a foundation, but I do think you need to drive more towards that resiliency. The investments that they have planned are much more consistent with that theme. They're looking at enterprise manufacturing intelligence, #1 investment that the survey came back with. They want to do digital manufacturing and simulation, again, a much more advanced concept. And they want shop floor mobility. They want to put mobile devices in the hands of the people on the manufacturing shop floor. Those are the 3 top investments, much more consistent with this notion of resiliency. And just a quick example, BMWBrilliance, a joint venture here in China, they built a brand new plant to be natively resilient. So this plant has to do a multitude of products. So traditionally in an automotive assembly plant, I set up lines to produce a single model, right? And I want to do that over and over again. But this plant is able to do multiple configurations. They're able to do electric vehicles and combustion engine-based vehicles all in the same plant, very resilient. They're able to adapt to the market very quickly. They're very resilient. Let's stay in automotive for a moment. I'm now introducing the concept of the future of intelligence. And if we think about what created competitive advantage over the years, the first thing we encountered was economies of scale. So if we think about Ford Motor Company in mass production, they had these vertically integrated plants where rubber from their plantations came in one end and finished Model Ts came out the other. They spread their costs over a high volume of output. That was an economy of scale. Then, building on economies of scale, we sort of transitioned to economies of scope. I think of General Motors under Alfred Sloan in this context. They had Cadillac, they had Chevrolet, they had Oldsmobile, they had Buick. They spread costs over a number of different products. They got an economy of scope. As we moved into the late 1980s, Toyota realized they couldn't match the capabilities of the Western European and US OEMs, so they needed to do something different. They adopted Lean and they adopted Six Sigma. They created the Toyota production system for continuous improvement. They created economies of learning, and they were able to offer cars at a very good price with very good fuel economy, and they created a competitive advantage. We think the next, in the digital economy and the experience economy, competitive advantage is going to go to those companies that create economies of intelligence. Now, we don't know who that is. I don't know if it's a Korean OEM, a Japanese OEM, US OEM, Western Europe, maybe a China OEM, very likely. We don't know who's going to establish that, but that is going to be what defines competitive advantage on all industries. I'm just using automotive as an example. So all of those economies have a curve related to them. What does the economies of intelligence curve look like? Well, there's 2 dimensions. One is how much value do I get out of the information I have at my company? And this is another thing we debated internally. Should it be intellectual property? Should it be intangible assets? I think Morgan might argue that it should be knowledge and know-how should be on that y-axis. But regardless, you get the idea. It's something intangible that we have to be able to get value out of. And the reason the way we do that is by increasing my organization's capacity to learn. You know, personally, we know our IQ, our intelligence quotient. Your company has an IQ as well. That's its capacity to learn. The other part of it is its ability to synthesize information. How well can it incorporate that information into its ability to learn to create advantage? And the ability to do this quickly and rapidly as I iterate experiences will define competitive advantage in the digital economy. Now, I can't do this, I can't achieve these economies of intelligence by doing a proof of concept at a time. I need a digital platform that organizes everything I'm trying to do consistently. We think this digital platform is made up of a set of services. One is around orchestrating the way data moves across your company through strong integration and orchestration services. The ability to be developer friendly. You need to give access to people who want to use the data to create value. So it needs to be based on microservices and be developer friendly. It needs to be able to enable a new customer experience. This could be collaboration, it could be AR, VR, it could be mobile devices, it could be chatbots, so need new interfaces. But perhaps most importantly is the intelligent core. This is where I manage the data models and the semantic graphs of my company, where the data lake sits, where I have my cognitive and artificial intelligence capabilities. So as providers go, it has to be broad and deep, and certainly we see, as analysts, we see Dassault as front and center, as someone who can offer these sorts of capabilities to you. So let's come back to the survey and look at the future of intelligence and what the folks that responded from China told us. Well, their priorities for creating value from data is to understand customer patterns, to improve product performance, and to create new revenue models. And this is very encouraging to me because it's not one thing. I would be more worried if all three were very similar. This tells me that manufacturers in China are looking at intelligence and using data very broadly across a number of different areas to drive improvement and advantage. The inhibitors, not surprisingly, data quality. Every time I hear this, I feel like I've been in a time machine because I go back to 1995 sitting in a meeting saying we've got a data quality problem. We seem to have a permanent data quality problem. But the issue is we need to think about data differently. We need to think about it in terms of a knowledge graph or a semantic graph, not just a data model. I can't do inference and I can't do artificial intelligence if I don't understand the relationship between the data. So data quality is taking on a whole new level of importance because it's going to be the basis of all of the intelligence that I deliver to my organization. The second is integration with ERP, and this comes back to the information technology and operational technology integration. This is, I agree 100% with our survey respondents. This is a major issue we see in all regions in the manufacturing industry, and we need to work on that. And the last is shop floor mobility, is how do you implement in a safe, reliable way mobile devices onto the factory floor. To me, this isn't quite as important as the first two, but it's interesting that it was listed as one of the inhibitors. So just an example of from China of someone who we feel like is on the path to establishing economies of intelligence. It's Haier. They've done a lot of things. They have a product platform. They're able to collect data about how their product is performing in order to use that information and synthesize it and improve it. But my favorite part of Haier is their ability or their intent to remove layers of management. They're trying to get data and an augmented analysis in the hands of the people on the front line making decisions. They're trying to eliminate all those people in between that work on spreadsheets all day long, and all they do is organize data and send reports. So they're not looking to reduce the number of knowledge workers they have. They're trying to double the productivity of knowledge work at the company. And they're on, as I said, they're on this path to economies of intelligence. So guidance, just to give you first a quick summary, digital transformation opportunity is huge. It will define our markets in the future. Operations needs to be built on concepts of resiliency, not just throughput, but how do I deal with the complexity that a digital world brings. And third, competitive advantage in the future will go to those companies that can establish economies of intelligence. Some specific things you can be looking at to do that. The digital transformation platform, that digital platform I talked about, may be the most important technology decision you've ever made, but certainly the most important technology decision you'll make in the next 1 or 2 years. Be careful of vendors that come in and tell you they have a better algorithm than somebody else, especially in intelligence. I like to tell people in the 1980s, I did my graduate study in artificial intelligence, and I thought I wasted all that money because we couldn't do anything that I learned, right? However, the same random forest logistical regression algorithms I learned back then haven't changed very much today. The difference is in the data. So you need to give preference to vendors who walk through the door, who understand your industry, and get you a big head start on that data problem that I talked about. Obviously, you have to expect to support new deployment models, especially the cloud. And perhaps most importantly, your efforts must be scalable and sustainable. And that's sustainable for your people, for our collective responsibility to the planet, and to your long-term profitable growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bob, for your presentation. We also have the question from the audience. Let's zoom into the platform. See the question. Bob, you mentioned the economy of intelligence with an important role of the information and the data. What does it take to master these new type of economies?
I'm chuckling, it's a great question because we have a report coming out that's called Mastering the Economies of Intelligence. So I don't know if it's one of my colleagues that planted that question or not, but it's a great question, and I could spend another 30 minutes talking about it. So what we've done is, so those two things you have to do, increase the capacity, your organization's capacity to learn, and your ability to synthesize information. And we've come up with 5 factors in each column. If you let your Dassault folks know, what I'll do is I promise if you're interested in that, I'll make the report available to Dassault and you can distribute it to your audience. The one thing I will say is the one thing that is in both columns is the cultural elements of economies of intelligence. And that's about having what we call an evidence-based culture. That is, how many of your managers walk into a meeting and go, you know what? My intuition tells me we should do this, right? Is your organization based on data? Is it based on evidence? Do your senior executives say, no, don't bring me what you think. Bring me the data that shows me, that validates what you're thinking about doing. And that cultural element, a strong evidence-based culture, is key to moving forward in my mind. That's the first thing that has to get settled. And like I said, we have 10 other things. I'd be happy to share those, but we probably don't have time to go through those.
Okay, thank you so much for the answer and the comments. Let's see, next question. This is how long does it take to fully switch to resilient model? You mentioned about the resilient model of the company you showed, and to make it profitable and sustainable.
Well, I think I'll take the second half first of that question. I think right from the start, it's profitable and sustainable. I think it delivers a return almost immediately. How long it takes is a little bit, I'll give you a very consultant question, it depends, right? I think it really depends on what's your starting point. Do you have a standardized MOM foundation across your factory network? Do you have a good data model? Do you understand, do you have a historian where you have all the tag data from the sensors defined? If you have a good foundation, you can get there relatively quickly. If you don't, you have to make a lot of foundational investments, so it would take a lot longer.
Thank you for the great answer. And also, I took some notes during your presentation as a summary of takeaway. You really mentioned about in a leading country like China, key success factor remains build a resilient system to navigate in a changing environment while maintain your central purpose. And the second topic, invest in a digital transformation platform, enabling business innovation, data services, collaboration, and the continuous improvement. We have to take as an ongoing effort. And the third is leverage data information and intellectual property to master economies of intelligence.
Right. That's a great summary.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, good.